Chapter 1, Lesson 1 in Algebra, and we're going to begin by looking at symbols and expressions. And we need to be very good at looking at different symbols in math and different expressions in math and recognizing what they mean. And that kind of brings me to a point that I will make continually throughout this year and as you advance through mathematics. And the idea is this, is that math is really just another language. It's a language that has symbols that we use to represent ideas. It's a language that has syntax. There's a certain order that things need to go in. And when we say something in English, we need to be good at translating it into the math symbols. And if something's in math, we need to translate it into English. And we do this all the time, even though we don't think about it. When we look at the math symbols, let's say 4 plus 4 equals 8, we say this is the math language. In English, we write 4, we write the word for, so we translate that into the English for, we translate that into the word plus, we translate that into the word for, we translate that into the word equals, and we translate that into the word 8. And so what we're very good at is taking these simple mathematical expressions, which are mathematical sentences written in the math language, and we translate them into the English language, an English sentence. And we need to be able to go from math to English and from English to math. And really, that is the crux, and that is the basis behind math. So we're just learning another language, and what we have to do is become better at recognizing phrases in English and what they mean in math and how we translate those from English to math. Most of us can go from math to English pretty easily, but when it comes to going from English into math, those dreaded word problems, well, then we have some problems. And I will suggest to you that as we get to even more complicated expressions, it becomes even more difficult to correctly translate this from math into English. So we want to become better at that. So in this algebra course, you'll hear me talk a lot about English and math and it being a language. You'll hear me talk a lot about translating. And so that's really going to be a focus of our course. And so I want you to keep that in the back of your mind, is that math is just a language. And we just need to learn what the symbols are that represent the different ideas. What's the order that things go in? What's the syntax? How do we correctly punctuate? How do we correctly group? When do I put a comma? What groups together? What's a clause? What a sentence? Etc., etc. And we're going to do the same thing in the math language. So let's begin by looking at some algebraic expressions. What is an algebraic expression? What are some terms that we need to know? Now, in the table at the right here, we have a variable h down here, and well, that must mean we need to know what is a variable. So a variable, as we read it here, is a symbol, and we want to look at this. It's a symbol, and it's usually a letter, okay, and it can represent one or more numbers. Okay, so the word variable, what does it mean? So in our note-taking, we want to write down the term variable, and then we want to break this sentence down. We don't want to copy the sentence, we'll just take out the main ideas. It's a symbol, and it's usually a letter, and it can represent a number, either one number or can represent multiple numbers, and that's what a variable is. Okay, so an example of a variable might be like the letter X or H. Okay, as we read further, it says that an algebraic expression is a mathematical phrase. Okay, so we want to know that it's a mathematical phrase, and it can include a number or a bunch of numbers, variables, and operation symbols. Now, operation symbols are the adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing symbols. Now, algebraic expressions are sometimes called variable expressions. Okay, so if we take this term, and again, we want to use a different color now because we're going to look at a different idea, so we'll use green in our notes. So an algebraic expression is a mathematical phrase. Okay, that's what we get from here. It can be a number, a variable, and it includes operation symbols. And it's also known as a variable expression. So if it contains variables, it's going to be a variable expression. Okay, so that's what a variable is, and that's what an algebraic expression is. Okay, so it's any expression, math phrase that includes numbers, variables, and even operations. Okay, now a couple of notes here that I want to, or an example of that would be x plus 3. Here we have a variable, here we have an operation, and here we have a number. So this entire thing together would be an algebraic expression. Now, when we're talking operations here, I want to take a note here. Let me erase this stuff here because we don't need that. When we're talking about multiplication, there's a way that I want us to handle this, because as we get into upper level math, it's going to be that way. So we're going to start doing it now. And because the symbol x looks like the variable x, and this is also the multiplication symbol, and if we use the dot for multiplication, which some of you may have used, that looks like a decimal. So in order to avoid confusion, what I want us to use from here on out, whether our book does it or not, is to use parentheses to write multiplication. So I don't want you to write 5x6. This looks like a variable expression, 5x6. Okay, we want to write it as a mathematical expression with parentheses, because parentheses mean multiplication. So we should write this as 5 in parentheses and then 6 in parentheses, and that would indicate multiplication. Okay, so when you have numbers in order, you want to use parentheses to represent multiplication, not this X looking symbol and not a dot or a decimal looking symbol. Additionally, if you have variables with numbers, they usually don't use parentheses. If you have numbers next and letters next to each other and there aren't any other operation symbols between them, there's no plus sign, there's no minus sign, there's no division sign, and there's no multiplication sign, then that means this is a multiplication problem. In other words, 5xy can be written, is actually means 5 times x times y. This is a multiplication expression, even though there aren't any parentheses, there isn't a multiplication symbol, and there isn't a dot multiplication symbol either, and there aren't any other symbols. So I want you to get used to that. This is a multiplication problem here, and it's representing multiplication. So that's one of those translation things. This is 5 times x times y. That's what that means. Also, any variables written without parentheses, then we also understand that to be multiplication as well. So anytime you have symbols next to each other where there aren't any other operation symbols between them, it represents multiplication. Okay, so those are variables, those are algebraic expressions, and those are some things about multiplication that we want to begin using and looking at and being able to recognize as we translate moving forward.